Welcome to the National Wilderness Skills Institute Trail Management Objectives and Introduction to the Backend of Trail Work presentation, or as my employees know it, oh boy, there we go, Trail Fundamentals for Trail Dogs. And in case you're curious what a trail dog is, it's you. It is the person working on the trail. So this training is meant to help you be able to read trail management objectives or TMO documents and to use that information to go out and do the right work on the ground. Hopefully, it also gives you a little bit of context about what we think about when we're managing a trail. And as stated before, my name is Jess May. I'm the trail specialist here in Northwest Montana on the Flathead National Forest. I've also worked in California, New Mexico, and Colorado. So I've kind of got a range of experiences. And MJ's worked in the Pacific Northwest as well as here. He can probably say more, but we're not going to let him because we're short on time. So we're going to cover a lot of information really quickly in this presentation. And some of these slides will be flashing by pretty quickly. So feel free to enter as many questions as you have, but we may or may not be able to get to them. And I think the best way for you to actively engage with this presentation is to think about a trail that you know well and consider how it fits into this framework we're going to describe and all of the elements that we think about when we're managing a trail. And then we will occasionally prompt you to enter the name of the trail and some of the design elements into the chat. Okay, so now the official objectives. Our objectives today are to review some basic trail concepts, learn how the Forest Service categorizes trails, and talk a little bit about the tools we have for data management to help us do the work in the field. So why do you care? I know that I cared when I was a temp because it meant that there was vision for the work I was doing. It meant that I was part of a large professional organization that has actually considered what it wants its trail system to be. And from a practical perspective, these are the documents that tell me when I go on the ground what the guidelines or expectations I should be following are. So, you know, even if you're not a Forest Service employee or working on a Forest Service trail, it is likely that a similar document or expectation exists for where you are. And so it might look different, but the same ideas are probably being considered when they're thinking about a trail. And so the last thing I want to say in introduction is that this website is super, super important. It has all of the information that we're going to talk about today available on it. So it is an amazing resource to you. And I have thrown it into the chat. It is frontward facing, so you don't have to be on a Forest Service computer to access it. And so with that, MJ.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so we're going to start in with the 5 basic concepts that we're going to be working with today. These comprise the trails fundamentals, and they're essential for sort of all phases of trails management. So trail planning, design, the construction, the maintenance, managing the uses on it. All of these concepts sort of help guide how we deal with trails from start to finish. And so those 5 concepts are trail type, managed use, designed use, trail class, and design parameters. As I say that, it probably sounds a little bit like bureaucratic mumbo jumbo, but we'll as we get through it, we'll see a little bit more exactly what those. So let's start with what is a trail? What is a definition of a trail? I think we all know a trail when we see it, but from our perspective, there is a very specific definition in the Forest Service, and that is any any route that is less than 50 inches in width, that crosses the landscape. That's a trail. We may look at trails that are wider than 50 inches for specific reasons, particularly like motorized trails. But that's a pretty specific management decision. So a forest trail is a trail that the forest has decided is necessary to keep up. So there's lots of trails out on the landscape, whether it's on Forest Service or private, or a lot of different land management agencies. Not all of those trails are maintained or ones that are desirable. So a forest trail is one that in the Forest Service system is one that we decided is necessary. And then we go sort of another level of officialness, is the National Forest System Trail. And that is one that the Forest Service itself is responsible for maintaining. And for those of you working in the Forest Service, that those are the trails that you'll most likely be actually working on this summer. And in other contexts, it's those trails that are purposely put on the landscape and managed as such. And that's where we put sort of the most of our effort. Okay. So here's this slide kind of shows these five fundamentals that help guide us in our management of trails. And we'll be getting into the details here soon. So what's the purpose of these of all of these fundamentals, and what's the what are we doing here? We're trying to put together a common point of reference for a lot of different aspects of trails, so this started off as a way to kind of to start to think about trails, and I think it started off pretty organically, but it's sort of coalesced into this framework that we're going to be talking about today, so there's a lot of sort of resources that this presentation is drawing on. First of all is Forest Service Manual or Forest Service Handbook. That provides a lot of really sort of the boilerplate direction for the agency, and actually a lot of other agencies use what the Forest Service has come up with there. That's sort of legal direction for how we manage trails. The Forest Service standard drawings and specifications. This is probably, of all of these things, are the things that you may actually have your hands on the most this year, and you may be looking at, particularly at the start of the season, what is at drawings of what we're looking for on the trail. These other pieces play into things, but it's probably a little bit more detailed than we really need to dive into in this presentation.
So I will take back over. What is the common point of reference? MJ started to kind of set the stage for that. And, we consider all of this background documentation, we consider all of these ideas, and they all came together as the trail management objective, or once again, TMO. And so TMOs are the document which states the intended purpose and management of a national forest system trail based on management direction, including access objectives. What does that really mean? It means that it is a document that tells you what it's talking about, trail name and number, where it is, where is that trail, both the start and the end, who is it designed and managed for, when can it and can it not be used, and how should it be constructed and maintained? What are our expectations for it? So this is what one looks like. at least when it's printed out from a Forest Service document. And, it's that foundation for trail planning, construction, maintenance, and ongoing management, which is all great and fine, but I like to keep these in my trail folders so that the crew can look at them before heading out on a given trail, if that's a new trail that they're not familiar with, or if they're not sure what's going on, because it tells them the important things that they need to know. So we're going to walk you through the contents of a TMO, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to read one if one's put in front of you, and you'll just be more aware of the elements that we're considering when we're doing trail management. So to begin with, we have the trail definition. This is where we have that what and why. It's got the trail name, it's got the trail number, it's got how long it is and where it starts and ends. Also important in the trail definition is the trail type. The trail type is essentially, it's what is the trail moving on? So there are three options, three possibilities. It might be a standard/terra trail, which means dirt. It might be a snow trail, and it might be a water trail. So every trail in at least the Forest Service system is considered one of those things, but only one of those things. So it doesn't matter if there is a snowmobile trail that overlays a hiking trail, we do consider those to be two separate trails. And that's because it allows us to think about the actual needs of each trail, because there are different brushing specifications. There are different things that a trail needs based on its surface. And so when there are two trails on a same route, they do have separate TMOs. So you can't just look for the TMO of the Terra Trail if you're working on the snow trail. But they will be linked routes. There will be a note on the TMO saying that it overlays another trail, which is kind of handy. So trail type, this is where you get to interact. I would love it if at least a few of you would include the name of the trail you're thinking about and what you think the trail type would be for it. I'm guessing most of you picked a Terra trail, but I would love to see if anybody came up with a different one. All right, and while you do that, I'll keep talking. So after we have that trail definition, we go to the travel management strategies. That's made of three different elements: the managed use, the prohibited use, and other use, which is kind of a weird one. So to start with managed use, what is that? That is the mode of travel that is actively managed and appropriate on a trail based on, design and things. So it takes into consideration our intent for the trail. There can be more than one managed use. We might manage a trail for hikers and for horses, for example, sometimes even for mountain bikes. And managed uses doesn't mean every use that will be happening on a trail. It's just the ones that we are actively managing for. So in the case of the trail that I've pulled up here, it is managed for hiker, pedestrian, and pack and saddle. It is managed for both of those over the entire length of the trail. This is important. It is only managed for those from June 1st through the end of September. And that's because that's when I have trail crews working every year. If I don't have people working, I can't be managing that trail for people. I mean, you can, but it gets a little bit fuzzy. So there is a season that we are managing the trail for. All right, so trail type, managed use. I'm asking for your interaction again. I am hoping that you will now list your trail name and who you think it is managed for. And that might be more than one type of person or user. I would love to see some with multiple managed uses. Next up, prohibited use. Yeehaw. So this is a kind of a big one. Prohibited uses are modes of travel that are prohibited by a legal order. This is actually, there has to be a specific order closing the trail to that use or prohibiting that use. It doesn't have to be the entire trail. It can only be part of the trail. And it it can also only be for part of the year. It doesn't have to be a year-round closure or prohibition. I really should be saying prohibition here. And typically the reason for the prohibition is listed on the TMO, which is useful if you get the public asking, why am I not allowed to use this here? So let's see, in this example, let's look at, on our trail, we have a motor vehicle closure or prohibition for just the first 0.31 miles of the trail, year round, and it's to protect grizzly bear habitat. So that's interesting. And if you actually keep looking, you'll see that motor vehicle use is prohibited year round, or over the entire length of the trail, sorry, but it's for different reasons. So it's worth looking at all of your prohibited uses. Next up, we have other use. Other use is a little bit interesting because non-motorized use is allowed everywhere unless expressly prohibited. So we frequently don't actually write non-motorized uses into the other uses unless there is a specific reason. Let's say a history of conflict and we want to, or a change in management direction. So we want to specifically state that somebody is allowed there. But in general, with non-motorized, we assume it's allowed. On the other hand, motorized use, we have to take into consideration all motorized uses on all trails for all time periods. So I'm actually using a different example here because you'll remember that the last trail was closed to motorized all times. This one is open for motorcycles over its entire length all year. This is under the other uses because for this particular trail, we only manage for motorcycles for that June through September timeframe. So we want to make sure that it's recognized that motorcycles are still allowed year-round on the trail. All right, and back to MJ.
All right, so we've covered sort of trail type and managed use. Now we're driving towards the design use and how do we what makes up what are the components that help us figure out what the design use is. So this starts with the ROS or the WROS class. And ROS stands for Recreation Opportunity Spectrum. And then WROS is the Wilderness Recreation Opportunity Spectrum. And then the next piece is the trail class. And so that is the level of development for the trails. So making a decision on how much do we need to build this trail out to, you know, what are the, you know, how developed should it be? Okay. And then and that all of that stuff sort of drives what the design use is. So those things above combined with what we're managing it for, we kind of pick the use that needs the most infrastructure, the most sort of the most development, and we design the trail to accommodate that use, which will then allow that particular use. And this, you know, the example here is pack and saddle, will allow other uses below it to be able to use the trail effectively as well. All right. So starting off with recreation opportunity spectrum, I really love the recreation opportunity spectrum. It is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful framework when we're thinking about recreation in outdoor recreation on public lands. It allows you to kind of help put in sort of specific categories different types of recreation that can occur on a landscape. And this is a long-standing management tool, and it's usually defined in the forest plan and on Forest Service units. So it's actually it's pretty prescribed in policy, and it's used to communicate what the desired condition is, what's the desired recreational experience in particular parts of the forest. And so, for example, you may, many of you are aware that ski areas are often on National Forest System lands, and those are really highly developed places. So that's a place where we see a lot of infrastructure, a lot of things, metal and maybe some concrete. That's going to be in the recreation opportunity spectrum would be in an urban setting, an urban recreation opportunity spectrum setting. And you compare that to, on the other end of the spectrum, sort of the top of this table here, you have places that may be in wilderness or at least very wilderness-like, where there's maybe absolutely no infrastructure, and folks who are recreating there need to depend on their own skills, equipment, to move through that landscape and be in that landscape. And we provide very little infrastructure there. So trails are categorized into these different sort of levels of experience, and that helps guide sort of the later areas there too. So real briefly, wilderness recreation opportunity spectrum. Those are categories sort of that are basically within that primitive piece at the top of the table. There's a scale within designated wilderness areas as well, that you might want to be aware of if you're operating in wilderness. So. All right. So the recreation opportunity spectrum setting helps also drive what the trail class is going to be. What is the level of development that we're going to that we're going to either build a trail to or maintain a trail to. So this is the prescribed level of development. So we're deciding in advance to what extent we're going to build a trail, and really, how easy is it going to be to travel on this particular trail? How easy do we want it to be? There are some places where in a more primitive setting where we might want it to be kind of a challenge, right? And I think a lot of us can really resonate with that with the ability to sort of challenge yourself on a trail. And then on the other hand, you may want to we also want to have trails where there's relatively easy access or safer access, or can accommodate a larger number of people. That may mean a larger trail class. So the trail class, kind of takes into account all the things we've talked about so far, and reflects the management intent for it. What's important here to consider is sometimes the trail class doesn't reflect reality on the ground. You may be, look at your TMO going out, it's like, oh, it's a trail class 3, expect this to be pretty easy. You go out there and you can barely find the trend. That happens, and that's okay. And it may mean that the unit doesn't have the resources to build it out to that, or may just have other priorities at the moment. There may be a lot of reasons for why that trail may not be built out to that trail class. So the trail class doesn't typically change all that much. It's pretty well prescribed. Just briefly saw the question from the and it may but if things change, if management changes, if some of the things that we talked about earlier to change, then we may consider changing the trail class. So only one trail class is identified per trail, and these are pretty broad categories, right? It's the trail class itself is allows for pretty broad scope. When we get into the sort of the parameters, then you start getting to a little more specifics. Yeah, go ahead. So typically trails are going to be there's a direct relationship between the managed use and the trail class. I think that should be pretty clear. If we're managing it for managing it for wheelchairs or motorized vehicles, we're going to have maybe a little bit higher trail class, but thinking about what exactly we're trying to achieve is going to derive what our trail class is going to be. And not every use is appropriate for every trail class. I think, the next slide will help us sort of start to wrap our heads around it a little bit. So here's the trail class matrix. So this is a wonderful table that I would really love for all of you to go to the website that Jess put in the chat and pull up the trail class matrix and start to study this a little bit. Particularly as yours, if you pull up a TMO, pull for a particular trail, pull up this matrix and get a sense of where your trail lies on this. And there's sort of different sort of trail attributes, and then how these trail attributes change through the trail class is kind of it's kind of neat to kind of to get familiar with how these things change with class. So at trail class 1, we're at the most minimally developed, so not really much going on. If you could go back a couple, or I guess we could stay here. So trail class 1. It's really minimally developed. So the constructed features, let's take that for example. There's really no bridges, there's no truncheon or anything like that. Whereas in the trail class 5, you're going to have frequent structures. You're going to have turnpike, puncheon, bridges. When it may be an asphalt structures. It may be a railing, even when the side slope is steep. You wouldn't find any of those kinds of features in trail class 1. So, go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is where we get to get a little more visual, and then hopefully you're thinking a little bit about sort of categorizing the trail that you have in your mind. Where does it fit in with these trail classes? So trail class 1, the tread may be just kind of intermittent or indistinct. You may go hundreds of feet without really seeing any kind of tread, or you may see really significant obstacles. Like we were looking at the root masses in that lower left photo, or really large boulders that are kind of in the way, and you're kind of tripping over. And you may have large boulders for a while, and you have sort of a bit of a wide tread, and then you hit a meadowy area, and it kind of disappears. So if we have a trail class 1, that's sort of if that's in the TMO, that's kind of the intent. It's kind of the experience we're going for. There's specific reasons for having that. Okay. And trail class 3, sort of in the middle of the road. Probably in most Forest Service units, this is where we see the most trails are going to be in this. Most of our miles of trail, I would venture to guess, are in this trail class 3 area, and it's sort of threads the needle between being somewhat rugged and having a few structures and a few things to help people along, or to in particular in trail class 3s, some of the structures are there basically to keep us from degrading the resources around it, keep the users from making a big mud hole. So that puncheon bridge there with surrounded by some thimbleberry and some wetter plant species. If that bridge wasn't there, you'd probably see a big mud hole, and it would be kind of difficult to get through. the people on this trail probably could get through it pretty easily, but it's just going to get worse and worse and worse as people go through it. So, so this is some of the things to the, some of the reasons behind structures on a trail class 3. Okay. And then trail class 5, the highest level. I really love these photos because they actually some of these are from an old unit that I was on, and so the lower left is at Deception Falls on the Skycomish Ranger District on Highway 2, a beautiful spot, and is a great example of a trail class 5 with asphalt pathways, winding. It's a really short trail. It's about a mile long. And we worked hard to keep those obstructions to a minimum, where we're pulling little rocks out of the trail, things that we would never do on a trail class 3. So, so those are really good examples. You might, you all probably have some ideas of a trail class 5 in your head. Just by looking at these photos, it might remind you of some other trails that you're aware of. So. So we've got trail type, managed use, trail class. All of these things are sort of working together to paint the picture of how we're going to manage a trail. Okay. So that gets us to, when we have all these sort of managed use, these different managed uses, we have to decide how we're going to design that, trail, to what level we're going to build that trail out and get a little bit more detail beyond just the trails class. So this gets us to where the designed use, which is the single use that we're going to make sure that we cover, that we accommodate on this trail. So the managed use of a trail requires the most demanding design, construction, and maintenance parameters that, in conjunction with the trail class, determines the design parameters. So the very specifics, what the drawings are going to look like for this trail. So it's one single design use for the trail. That doesn't mean that other people can't use it, right? Because that has more to do with the prohibited use. But we're choosing the designed use that's going to accommodate all the uses that we want to manage, or to the most stringent standard. So this design use determines the technical specifications for, and this is where we get into the actual standards that we have. So here's an example. We're managing for hikers and pedestrians. We're also managing for pack and saddle. So typically a hiker can handle more obstructions and more tighter corners, a narrower bridge. Hiker could theoretically, depending on the trail class, could walk across a single log stringer bridge. It's not necessarily what we're the kind of situation that we want to put someone on horseback through. So this is sort of the easiest example to see that, yeah, we're going to be wanting to build this trail at every trail class, we're going to want to build that trail out to accommodate someone on horseback if we're managing for that pack and saddle use. If we end up trying to build a trail for designed use for hiker, and we're still trying to manage for pack and saddle, that could be actually a pretty dangerous situation. So go ahead. All right, so we have sort of our, we're driving from the biggest picture stuff down to down to those details. And this is where Jess, I think, will pick up and talk about the start getting down to from the map to the rock and trees.
Yes, very exciting. This is the part that's actually most useful to most trail dogs. So design parameters often have their own full page. You can see that there's a lot of things in here. So these are the actual technical guidelines for taking care of the trail. What should its tread width be? How often should it be maintenanced? This is all based on the combination of designed use and trail class. So who is it designed for? What level of experience are we expecting or desiring to give them? And then combine that and you get these technical parameters. And we have, at least in the Forest Service, a set of predefined, standardized answers to what those specifications are based on the combination of trail class and designed use. But they're all a range, and it's designed so that local deviation can be established. So I can decide as the trail manager that I have a trail that is managed for pack and saddle and for bikes. And maybe I choose that one's always kind of a tricky one. They both have slightly different but fairly high design standards. Maybe I choose to make it a bike trail, but I modify the clearing limits to meet the higher standard of the pack and saddle trail. There can be those deviations. It's not totally prescriptive, but it gives us all a starting point and a common expectation for roughly what a trail should look like. So this is an example of what those design parameter standard pages look like. When I found out that these existed a few years into working for the Forest Service, I was so excited. I may be a bit of a nerd, but I went and found all of them and sat there and read them and then compared them to what was existing on the ground, because it's fascinating to me that we've gone through and we've thought about what does it take to meet this need. So once again, you can find these on the website if you travel around from that link that I gave you. But looking a little bit closer, if we pull up the hiker and pedestrian design parameters, you'll see across the top here, it lists the designed use and then our 5 trail classes. And then down the side, it goes through the overall topics that it will cover. So that's tread width, surface, grade. There's a second page with more things. And then within those topics, it actually breaks it down even further. So for tread width, it breaks it down based on the type of experience we're trying to give. So is it a wilderness tread? Is it non-wilderness tread? Is it single lane, double lane? And then it also talks about minimum size for structures. For some of the others, it covers a variety of different elements that go into it. So surface is made up of both what is the surface actually made of, how many protrusions are there, how large can the obstacles be. And then you'll note that we mentioned it before, but not every designed use is suitable for every trail class. So typically pack and saddle trails are not trail class 1 because they tend to be hard to follow. They tend to have more obstructions, and it is often, though not always, tricky or potentially dangerous for stock. So they may not be so typically we do not have designed use and trail class 1 or pack and saddle and trail class 1 going together. And then on the other end of the spectrum, trail class 5 is usually paved or hardened surfaces. They're often considered accessible trails, and stock don't really do well on pavement, or it's not as desirable. So we typically wouldn't have a trail class 5 stock trail either. And then you'll also notice that I mentioned it, I touched on it before, but the specifications in here, or the parameters in here, are ranges. When it comes to actually putting together your design parameters to enter into your TMO, your manager will have picked a number, usually within that range. So once again, that website has the design parameters worksheets, and they can also be found in the Forest Service handbook. And so here you can see that for this trail that I've been walking us through, the Geyfer Creek Trail, the tread width is 24 inches, and it notes that there are moments where that may be larger, but the standard is 24. So this is a great place to look if you're just not sure what's expected of you when you go out to do maintenance on trail, or construction if you're doing a construction crew. And then also super cool, there are spec drawings, right? Trail work is basically engineering when you get down to it. It's awesome. We have spec drawings for everything ranging from just defining what tread is and what our clearing limits are. We're sitting here and saying, this is what an ideal trail would look like. And you'll notice that there's space. They're not telling you how wide anything is. They're just giving us a common language to talk about. So once again, in Nerdland, when I found out about these, I pulled them up, and it was like, I can start talking to anyone and point to a thing and say, this is what I mean. It's super useful, I think. And then we have the same thing for the structures that we build. So when your trail manager does ask you to build a structure, or when you go out into the world and see a structure on the ground, it is based off of some sort of specification. And you'll see in here, it gives us room for variation. They've got square ties on one side, round on the other. You'd use the same thing on both sides. But the point is, they're showing your options as clearly as they can. And you know, if you're contracting out a trail project, you can write in exactly what you want all the numbers to be and hold this up, and they can build exactly the structure that you want. Or in your case, you could receive these and build exactly the structure that I want. So it's another one of those really cool tools that the Forest Service has spent a lot of time thinking about and putting together. And once again, same website. We could go down, and like, if you spend enough time, you'll find exactly where in the website, but the point is, go there and you will find all of this information and more. So trail type leads to managed use and trail class, which are interconnected. Managed use gives you your designed use. Combine your designed use and your trail class, and you get design parameters. And because I really like making you do things for me, I want you to go into the chat and give the name of that trail that you were thinking about before, that you've been thinking about all throughout, and then also a design parameter that you think might apply to it. So perhaps, what do you think the design tread width is? Is it a 12-inch wide class 1 hiking trail? Is it a 36-inch wide class 4 stock trail? Is it a 60-inch wide class 5 accessible hiking trail? Think, consider, share. All right, back to you, MJ.
Yeah, excellent. So another part of the of a TMO document is the target task frequency, and basically this is just the frequency in which we would typically do particular tasks. So you know, we would do so on this particular one, we have, you know, trail opening. You know, that's something we would on this particular trail for this this segment, we would do that, try to do that every year. So that's the So we're basically doing that 100% every year. And so other maintenance items would have less than that. And so the sort of the two numbers that we have here is 1 and then 0.2. And 0.2 is basically every 5 years we would be doing some tread work on that trail. And I'm assuming, sort of tread work, we were looking at maybe, refreshing much of the tread on this trail every five years. So I think this isn't necessarily, I don't think there's very many units who are holding fast to this particular number. But it is very useful for you as you're preparing to go out on a hitch on a particular trail to kind of see what the priorities are. And I would imagine that a lot of this would reflect some of the other parameters up, that are above this, like if it's in an urban setting, or a more a higher level of development, there might be more greater frequency of maintenance there. But I think this helps paint the picture of what the intent is for that trail. And if I had trail crews paying attention to this stuff, and familiarizing themselves with this kind of detail on each trail that they go out on, I would imagine that you would have a real powerful sense of kind of the purpose of what the purpose of what you're doing out there, and also just having that bigger picture is likely to answer a lot of questions for you when you're out there doing a task. And when it can be hard to come back and ask that question. So. Special considerations. So this is basically allows us to put in, everything is pretty well prescribed, and there's lots of numbers and categories for much of the TMO. This is a chance to put a little bit of the art into it. Like, is there some things in here that we just can't capture in this form? How do we capture that? So so this is basically the comment section. So it might be a shared system. It might be accessible in some way. I'm thinking of a trail system that we're starting to develop on my district, where some new construction for some that will be the designed use will end up being mountain bikes, but we also want to allow for access for hand cycles. So it's be a little bit higher class trail, a little bit closer to town, and a higher ROS setting, and a more developed ROS setting. And we want to be able to make sure that folks who can use hand cycles have that we're building it out to allow them to use the trail as well. We're working with partners to do that. And so this might be a place to put that information in, because we don't necessarily have a hand cycle specification in our design parameters. This might be a place to call that out. It's also a place to talk a little bit about sensitivities that we need to have. Whether mechanized tools or certain pieces of equipment are prohibited. In wilderness areas, oftentimes, wilderness areas, there are places where mechanized tools are prohibited, and so this is a good place to call that out. And I think in particular, this is one threatened and endangered species, sensitive species. This is really one that would be really important for you going out in the field. Be really good to be aware of what are the sensitive species, the endangered species that in your area. What are our plant species that that are sensitive. That being aware of those things can go a long ways towards making sure that you're not doing any harm, or that if you see these species, then that's something to definitely report back to your supervisors. So, heritage resources, along the similar things. There are some trails that are specifically put along historic corridors or places where there's historic resources. It's really good to be aware of that, so that when you're digging or digging and building tread, and all of a sudden this neat old thing pops up, that you don't just rebury it or throw it off the bank. Knowing that these things might be out there is a good thing to know, so that you can stop and let someone know let someone know that you found a potential resource there. So easement, permits, agreements, those are also all things to be aware of. Are there outfitters using that trail? Some of these things may be captured in the TMO. I bet you a lot of them aren't. But these are all things that you would be wise to be asking your crew foreman or folks who are lining you out. Like, what are the complicated things I need to be aware about on this trail? So the TMO in the end it becomes policy. It becomes the written description, or the written guidance for trail crews, for managers, and so it's important that we have somebody's responsible for that, and that someone in the Forest Service is the district ranger, the line officer, who's responsible for that policy. So all that to say, it's important to know and to see that there are very deliberate, specific decisions all the way down the line, from sort of the highest level all the way down, and that district ranger signature sort of symbolizes what that this is policy. This is something, these are things that are providing guidance for folks in the field. So, documentation. So to kind of review here, so it's the documentation of the intended purpose of the management of a national forest system trail, and like we said earlier, these TMOs, they may not reflect the actual condition of the trail. They're not management decisions in the sense that we have to do exactly what they say, right? They provide guidance. And to someone's questions earlier, they can be changed. In my experience, they don't change very often or quickly, but they can be. So it gives us some good guidance on what we're looking at and what we're looking to achieve out there. So in many ways, all of these things, kind of guide, in many ways, it can provide context for the specific branch that you are cutting on the trail. Like, how far do we go to cut that branch? The TMO provides guidance for what that is, and I think it's important to know that it's kind of different on different trails. So it's not always the same. And I think when I was starting out, there was definitely a sense of, like, because most of the trails that I was working on when I started out were trail class 3 hiker trails. So to me, those were the parameters, and it took a while before I got experience on other trails. Like, oh, we need to go higher for stock now. We need to go wider for stock. we need to take a few more of these routes out because this is a higher trail class. So those are things that are that we that you start to just get a little bit more more nuance to how you view trails, and you will never be able to undo that. Once you start seeing trails in this way, once you start seeing trails in terms of trail class, of the design parameters, and all of these concepts that we're using today, every trail that you go on, you will likely start to see some of these details. You'll start to be able to guess what trail class something is, just on a brand new place in a brand new unit. I remember having visiting Costa Rica and walking on trails in Costa Rica, and my trail brain was started to go, and I started to think about what management decisions are they making here, and what are they trying to achieve, and how are they trying to achieve that? And I remember my wife just looking at me in disgust and saying, just enjoy it. You don't have to look at it that hard. But I do think it's sort of a neat perspective to have when you can start to peek behind the curtain a little bit on trails. So with that, I think I'm turning it over to Jess, right?
You are.
Thank you.
So great tie up there. I completely agree. Once I started to realize how much went into planning a trail and thinking about how you manage one, you can't stop seeing it. And it's really cool. And it's cool to think, like I've said a few times, at least within the Forest Service, there's this common thread everywhere you go. These thoughts and decisions have been written down somewhere. But even if you go outside of the Forest Service, city parks are doing this when they think about how they construct the trail around the lake in the city park. Like, everybody has to be thinking about these same common elements, and the words might be slightly different, the document might look slightly different, but the same elements are important for figuring out how you take care of something, or something in this case being a trail. So it's really cool. But I was going to do one more little section. So accomplishment reporting. Now you've learned about the trail from the TMO, you've gone into the world and actually worked on a trail, you've done something outside and made a difference in the world. What happens then? The Forest Service has a pretty robust reporting mechanism. It's a little old school, but it looks like this. It's a painful thing to fill out, but it gives us really awesome information. So we want to know what you did and where. And if you step through this, you'll see it's looking for what trail were you on, what type of improvement did you do, where did you do the improvement, what year was it? And this is actually, these are the things that are important to us, right? So what trail did you work on? What scale of work was done? I'll get into that in a minute. On which miles, who did the work, and what was the fiscal year? Some of these are pretty obvious. You do not need my help to know what trail you worked on, or which miles you worked, or what the year is. However, other things we are looking for are specific and sometimes unobvious. So we'll look at those in a little bit more detail. And you should keep in mind that your local reporting requirements may vary, but they're trying to break down the information to fit into the form I just showed you. So it does require these elements. The first difficult question is, what scale of work was done? And we break that into two things: miles maintained and miles improved. Miles maintained is the simple, though not always fast or easy work. That's cutting logs off of trails, that's brushing, that's rebenching. This is an example of really heavily maintained trail. This was not a construction project, it was a maintenance project, but we had to do quite a bit of brushing to find the trail corridor. We had to rebench it because this is really sluffy, soft material, and people were dodging the bushes. So they went way down the hill and then way up the hill, trying to stay away from the brush. And then we also improved the drainage or re-maintained the drainage by throwing in a little drain dip in the far distance there. So this is a maintenance project. Looks like a lot of work, was a lot of work, still maintenance. The just logging out the trail at the beginning of the year, that is also a maintenance project. There's kind of a range, but it's the work that doesn't require extra planning, essentially. Whereas miles improved is a bigger commitment. Miles improved often involves structure construction. It often involves NEPA. It often involves larger project planning. And sometimes that's just really, really, really heavy brushing. Like if you've totally lost a corridor, that might be an improvement project. In general, you will know that you're on an improvement project because you're whoever's sending you out will tell you. But it's nice to have kind of a context for what that will look like. Let's see. Next up, we've got the other kind of unobvious one is who did the work. And our options are force account, which is Forest Service employees typically. Force account fire, which is Forest Service fire crews. Contractors, outfitter and guides, and volunteers or partners. And what's really cool about this is because we enter that data or that information when we do our accomplishment reporting, we can pull out these awesome graphs that show us who did what work and who did how much work. I've got this currently broken down for just one of my districts last year. So across the district, force account crews, which are my employees, they maintained 189 miles of trail. Fire crews working for my district maintained almost 6 miles of trails, and volunteers and partners did a whopping 107 or 112 miles of trails. So they did almost the 2/3 as much as my trail crew. That's awesome. Huge contribution from our partners. And I love that I can pull this out and show it on a graph. I can also pull this information out trail by trail. So it's a really easy way to point and say, you know, this trail has basically been totally adopted by this partner. We may not have gone through the formal process of adopt a trail, but my partners maintain it every year. It's pretty cool. It's really interesting how we can visualize this and how some of the required reporting is actually providing some really awesome information. And then if you don't want to go through and make your own graphs because, you know, not everyone has that mind, and that's okay. This is what just the annual accomplishment reporting looks like, once again, for one of my districts. So in this case, we maintained 100 and almost 70 miles of forest system trail. Turns out we did 0.65 miles of non-forest system trail. That's because sometimes trails meander across administrative boundaries. We're still in charge of it, but it's not technically system because it's not on our land. We improved 2.6 miles. We have the miles that are meeting standard and then the percentage of miles meeting standard. So this is just fascinating. Like for me, as a worker on the ground, I like knowing that the work that I'm doing matters and that it's being tracked and that somebody's paying attention. I don't just come home at the end of a hitch, write down the number of trees that I cut and then have that disappear into the wind, right? Like there is a program keeping track of what work we're doing, and it's not at the tree by tree level. That's usually being tracked on a district level, but there is like this national perspective paying attention to what we're doing and considering what it takes to do what we do, which is really awesome. It, for me, makes the work more meaningful. And it looks like MJ and I did a good job of speaking quickly today, which is hard to believe because I think that was slightly less than a slide per minute. So way to hold on, and let's go through. And I think that I saw that there were some questions coming into the chat, which makes them harder to follow. So I might recommend that if you submitted questions to the chat, you move them over to the Q&A, and maybe Kent, you can start pulling those up for us?
You bet. I've got the questions here, and I'll go through the Q&A first, and then if we get enough time, then we'll move over to the ones I can see in the chat. But the first question is, can you go through the trail drawing specs that you showed earlier? Have some volunteers watching them. I'd like to know how to read those drawings. I guess my suggestion would be if one of you could just bring up maybe one of those spec pages, if you have it handy, and just go through and show how to read it. There you go. Excellent.
All right, let's see if I can do this. I've learned some fancy new skills recently. So this is a very basic one. It is basically defining what the trail corridor looks like. So you'll see that there's the drawing, and then there are arrows and lines and terms. So we're basically trying to show, you know, this is the trail bed. It is the solid underpinning of the trail. And then here, trail bed. And then if you go up here, there's the tread width, which is the actual part that is designed for walking on. And then you've got the shoulder width, which is that little bit of extra on the side where if you step over there, it's not necessarily going to be fully solid. And they're going with tread material. That's what the actual tread, which is that walking surface, is made of. Back slope is the angled side hill uphill. The gist of it is you can see that it just steps through what the name of every component of the trail is. And so like, this is that basic one. And let's see if I can, oh, I think I have to turn off the laser pointer to flip to the next page. So on a structure one, it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to show the gist of what the structure looks like. The potential in this case for a geotextile on the bottom, foundation type, it notes as specified. So you're going to want to look, you'll want to look up here, and the person will write in foundation type and then go through and specify what it is. And they just identify all the pieces. It's really hard to do this without sitting down and stepping through every word, which I'm not sure you guys want, but we will have those, boxes that go through what is it that we're talking about, in this case, infill material type, which it should say, and here where there should be a, one of these will say infill material, so you know what they're talking about, but it's going to be this. And they might say aggregate, they might say coarse rock, and they'll tell you how deep it should be and what size the rocks are, and basically everything about what they actually mean. It's so hard to do these over Zoom. MJ, you have anything to add?
So the main thing is go to the website that we put in the notes, and I think someone had a question about, you know, where are the trail parameters. I put in that the link to that. But you know, start printing, you know, print off the standard trail drawings, and you know, take them out in the field with you and see how they match up with reality. You know, it's really important just to get some reps on it, and you know, once you take if you go back a slide, Jess, once you kind of take that out into the field and you start doing some brushing, you know, this is sort of the standard trail plan, but there's actually sort of a clearing limit one, which is really useful. Actually, that's probably the one I would start with. Take the clearing limit standard drawing and take that out in the field with you, and you know, see how it matches up. Use it, and then the drawings start to come alive once they get a little bit dirty in the field with you.
Great, thanks guys. I think we'll keep on moving. The next question is, how is the trail class determined?
So yeah, so I think slide 36, kind of go back and reviewing that a little bit. So it's a bit of it's a little bit of an art, right? Because there's a lot going into, a lot coming into this. We have the managed use, where where this trail exists on the landscape, right? Where is it located? Is it near town? Is it way far away? Is it in wilderness? Is it a major corridor in wilderness, or is it deeper back there? So understanding where it's located and who we're kind of serving with this trail then starts to determine what level of development we're going to expect there. I don't think there's any sort of magic formula that you can plug in and then have it spit out what the trail class is going to be. It's going to be a bit of a judgment call, but like I said, more as you get sort of more reps and looking at the sort of the full range of trails, you start to get a sense of like what kind of trail is appropriate here. And I think that's a really good exercise for you all to do when you're out there is first of all trying to kind of discern what the different trail classes are, and then be able to start to guess why, right? And some of the easy answers are if we're trying to bring a lot of people to see a particular special thing right next to a road, where people are just driving on the highway right by, and they just the intent is people might stop for a half an hour to take a walk, then we would expect to have a higher trail class, maybe a class 4 or class 5. So bit of a review of what we talked about, but I hope that makes sense to the person asking that question.
Yeah, thanks, MJ. I think that does. There's a lot of factors that go into it. So the next question: have there been any efforts to learn or collaborate internationally on managing trails?
Yeah, I think there definitely has. So the Forest Service has a pretty robust international program, which is there to share a lot of knowledge and expertise with folks in international and from other countries, frankly, and a lot of that has to do with forestry and science and things like that. But there have been efforts to collaborate and help people, help folks in other countries develop trail systems or outdoor-based recreation programs. So I think that's. I haven't been directly involved with those things. I don't know if Jess, if you have as either, but so maybe Kent, you may have a little more insight on that front from your seat.
Yeah, I think I'll just add that the International Forestry usually comes out and asks someone like MJ or Jess to participate in it. If a country is looking for help, oftentimes in a park setting, to develop their park and their trails component, International Forestry will put together a set of specialists. And if it involves trails, they'll be coming out and asking one or more trail specialists to travel with them. Of course, this last year, not a lot of that's gone on. But that has gone in the past, and so actually the Forest Service is a look to provide some trail expertise. But that's the Park Service, BLM, and there's a lot of expertise now. They don't necessarily go with International Forestry, but there's a lot of really good expertise in a lot of the groups, such as IMBA and other groups that have some really specialized kind of trail building expertise, management, Novak, motorized trails. Anyway, so there is a recognition. There's a lot of expertise. So I'm going to move on. We'll try and get to the last two questions. We do need to. We only have 3 minutes, so we'll try to do these last two real quick. How does tracks data collection tie into TMOs?
Well, to start with, TMO's trail class dictates to a certain extent the frequency of tracks data collection. And so a class 5 trail gets a track survey more frequently than other trail classes. So that's the most direct way that tracks data collection ties into a TMO. Otherwise, there's a certain amount of how the tracks data collection aligns with the TMO. You're collecting things like how many structures are on the trail and what are your grades and whatnot when you're doing that track survey. And if you have lots and lots of structures on a trail class 1, that's kind of contraindicated by the TMO, and it raises some red flags. So there's connections. They're both found in the same database and cross-reference each other, but it is not a direct connection other than the frequency, I would argue.
Okay, and for the last one, I'm just going to reference, I did, the last question was about kind of decommissioning a trail and doing it in NRM and how that relates to TMO. I posted a document in the chat that explains decommissioning trail guidelines and goes through how that relates to TMOs and NRM. So with that, I think we're coming up on just a couple minutes. I want to thank both Jess and MJ for this excellent presentation. I really think you guys did a great job of talking about that backside of trail maintenance, bookkeeping of trails, TMOs. Very, very helpful. A lot of good information. And also, I want to thank Bill Hodge for the behind the scenes running of this program. Did a really good job, Bill. Thanks for keeping us on track and keeping everything moving. Really good.